Okay, welcome to Live.Stock podcast again. Here we are sponsored by the University of Tennessee Beef and Forage Center. I'm Bruno Pedreira, Center Director and UT Extension Forage Specialist. Today with Dr. Troy Rowan, our beef cattle specialist as well. How are you doing today, Troy?
I'm so good, Bruno. I'm doing my best Dr. Mason impression.
You'll be good with us today here. I'm pretty sure about this. We are here today with Dr. Kyle McLean, Associate Professor here of the Department of Animal Science. He's our specialist in ruminant reproductive physiology with the department. Glad I was able to say this. At the end of the day, he works with cattle and he will talk about Repro with us. You'll see that. Kyle, how are you doing today, man?
I'm good, Bruno. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah. We have been trying to get you on the list here, but it's tough, man. It's hard to find time in your agenda. Glad that we
Absolutely.
made this now.
For sure.
So, Kyle, let's start talking here with our Tennessee folks. I want you to tell a little bit more about yourself, your background. How did you end up here at the University of Tennessee?
So it's kind of an interesting roundabout story. So I grew up in southeastern Montana.
Cold.
Cold
Sometimes, yeah.
lots of cold and hot. It's all in the same year. But interesting livestock production. So heavy on the cow-calf production. Big open skies, just like they always talk about. And so it started developing the interest in animal science and in animal reproduction there. After that, I graduated from high school and went to junior college in Wyoming. Pretty much the same, just a little less trees. And from there, went to Oklahoma State to get my bachelor's degree in animal science, and then stayed at Oklahoma State to get my master's degree, which was in reproductive physiology with generalized focus in fetal programming. From there, I went further north to North Dakota State to do a PhD.
Also cold.
Also cold.
Yeah.
You're gonna start to see. Well, not really. That's why I tended to end up down here. But yeah, so got my PhD in nutritional physiology, but the projects were largely focused in fetal programming. And so that's really where my interest in reproduction and reproductive efficiency is held, is that combination of nutrition and repro to impact the fetus.
So Kyle, can you, I guess at a producer level, talk a little bit about what fetal programming is and why should a producer care about fetal programming in their operation?
Sure, I'm happy to. So fetal programming, nuts and bolts of it is really what cow or bull are eating and how it can impact the calf. But as we get into that, we're actually finding that there's several stages to it. So what we're working on a little bit here is the early stages where we're looking at what the bull is eating and how that's impacting sperm and the seminal plasma. So the ejaculate and the contribution from the bull. But you also have the flip side as the follicle and the oocyte are developing, what that cow might be eating to impact gamete production. And so we'll get fetal programming that's a kind of early stage, which is one that's kind of interesting because a lot of times people don't think about it being that impactful that early.
Right.
And so we're diving into some of that. And then as you transition into the pregnancy side, you'll get fetal programming in early pregnancy. That's a lot of developmental type programming impacts, epigenetic changes, differentiation and system developed changes. And then you transition into the larger scale stuff that we'll see later in gestation, where nutritional levels or even as small as mineral supplementation can impact overall development. Now, those are the ones that producers will largely see.
Sure.
You get with small calves, big calves, thrifty calves that are just, they're the ones that hit the ground and they jump up and start eating right away and do better. And then there's also a newer level to this where we get some post-calving stuff with some of the stuff that the cow is getting and supplying in the lactational side, and kind of finishing out that development.
Yeah, no, I that's always been really interesting to me. The story I always think of is sort of famine in World War II, and the multi-generational impact that had on people. The same thing happens to cattle. So I guess how can producers, we'll say on the female side, sort of buffer themselves and give that calf as good of an opportunity to succeed before it's even born? What are some management things we can do there?
Here, where we are talking about a cow-calf operation.
Exactly.
Right? Tennessee is a cow-calf state. So
Yeah. So the interesting thing, and you'll love this as a geneticist, we like moderation.
Yep.
So the best way to buffer any big swings is to not have any big swings. So making sure that you're providing consistent supplementation through your mineral supplementation or overall forage energy, the big macronutrients, the more consistent you can be throughout the year in meeting the nutrients of the dam or even the bull, and we'll hopefully get to talk about that, in that is your best bet. Maintaining consistency in and avoiding the extremes is always going to be your best bet.
For sure.
Good. Before we get into the bull side of this, let's talk a little bit about your research on this, right?
Okay.
That's the opportunity we have here to talk with our producers in Tennessee. We know that you have been doing something on the program of Fito as well, within the state. What are the news on this?
So we started out, and I guess I'm going to backtrack just a touch here. When I first got to Tennessee, a couple of the first projects we did, we were looking at heifer development. So largely on the female side, and what we were feeding those heifers and how it potentially impacted the reproductive environment. So extrapolating it out into more of a, are they developing? And if so, yes, great. That's what we want. But if they're on differing diets, and the first study we did was protein levels, the next one we did was growth rate, and it was really to mimic what we would see in production. We get the protein supplementation because we know they're growing, we know they're developing, so we know we got to supplement protein. Does protein source and protein level matter, and does it matter to the point that it's actually getting to the uterine environment? Then with the growth rate, there's always those oopses, right? You always get through a winter that happens to be a little muddier or a little wetter than normal, and your heifers didn't grow like they were supposed to. So what happens when you all of a sudden try to backtrack from that? And we talk all the time about that on the pregnancy side, when those heifers are pregnant, but there's not as much work in that area when it's before the first pregnancy. So that transition into the breeding season, that would almost kind of mimic what the sheep industry would call flushing time. Does that change? And then we also did in that study with the flip side, where we're feeding them and everything's looking good, and then all of a sudden you hit January and all of a sudden they're a little fleshier and you'd like them to be. And so when we get to that area, what does that do? And does it just impact the way they look, or does it actually make it to the uterus and impact their ability to have that first conception and pregnancy? And the results of that one were really interesting. We were fortunate that the way it all laid out, we didn't impact production, but we were changing the reproductive environment. And so some of the stuff that we've started angling into is the immunological side and just looking at inflammation. So really not boiling it down to a level that is a disease state, or even a level that would classify problems, but changing inflammation. And think of it in terms of, we go through just day-to-day stresses. And if those day-to-day stresses are pregnancy or the reproductive environment, does that impact how well that female does?
That's something that always sort of blows my mind, is we think about reproduction and animal health being these very independent things, but all these inflammation events and immune responses, they're really integral to that early pregnancy, right? Making sure that a uterine environment is ready to accept something foreign, that ends up being immune in nature. And I think that your work is really interesting, bridging those gaps between repro, immune physiology, as well as nutrition.
Yeah, it's an interesting kind of three-legged stool. It's funny coming from the land-grant university, where we talk about that three-pronged approach. My lab really kind of takes that same thing, and where we're using nutrition to impact the immune system and health, but not to a disease state. We're actually looking at it on a reproductive state, because you're right. Pregnancy is this conundrum where we get this thing growing out of control. That's only half the same as the cow, and the female just allows it to grow, allows it to thrive, and maintains this tolerance to that animal.
A really interesting way to see this.
I know, right? I was meant to be at the land grant.
Kyle, let's talk about the bull management a little bit. We were talking about the male here. You mentioned the importance to keep them in good shape to be able to make through the year. How important it is to have a really good bull management strategy?
So I think the one thing that really gets overlooked on the bull management side is those swings. We know that swings in body condition score are happen. And honestly,
Because we are going to use a lot these bulls during the breeding time.
absolutely,
And
yeah.
later on, they will be there just hanging out.
Well, and that's the funny thing is if a bull's doing what he's supposed to go through the breeding season and lose a lot of weight. If he's not and he's concentrated on eating, the shade tree might not be a good place for him.
Yep.
I mean, we want calves and we want him out working, or he's not worth the money we've invested in him. And so we know that there's going to be a big swing. I mean, I think the last data I looked at in a 90-day breeding season, a normal bull could lose anywhere from 250 to 400 pounds. So you're looking at anywhere from 1 to 2 body condition scores on a normal basis. And so there's a big swing early, and then the struggle then becomes, what do you do with him when he's done? And most people, they get him out, they stop doing anything, the bulls do, and then they gain back the weight normally over time, which is great until you get 120 days out of the breeding season and they've gained back too much.
Yep.
It's no different than at Christmas time when we're all sitting on the couch and we get to the first of the year and we realize we've all of a sudden gained too much, right? And the fun thing with that is we're finding that while it does on extreme cases impact the fertility parameters of motility and morphology, the big thing that we're getting is it's not those parameters, it's the seminal plasma. The composition that we've largely discounted through the literature is starting to become more and more active in the research world. And so we're finding out that nutritional swings are changing that composition on an inflammation and a metabolite base that is very much going to change with those big swings. And so you think big picture with this, we get a 90-day breeding season, he loses a bunch of weight, you get him out and maybe over the course of the next 4 months, he gains it all back and some. Well, then you're trying to prep for the next breeding season. So you pull him back and he loses it. And if you pull him back enough, great. But if you pull him back too far, now you put him back on feed. And so you get this year-round kind of ebb and flow that can dramatically change what he's going to then contribute to the first cycle, the second cycle, the third cycle of the offspring in the next breeding season.
So how do you handle this to make sure that you are doing the right stuff?
You're going to kind of chuckle at this, but it's the same way we handle the female side that I talked to Troy about. Consistency. You want them to lose weight and you want them to gain it back, but then you need to make sure you're paying attention enough to make sure that you hit that mark and then you stay there.
And you keep the animal.
Yeah, because you want them to enter the breeding season at a 6 or a little bit above, but you don't want them to enter the weaning season in October at a 6, hit Christmas time at a 4, and then hit March turnout at that 5.5, 6, and we've got this giant fluctuation because you basically break that into 90-day segments, and each one of those spermatic waves hit one of those times, and you dramatically change what's going on.
Yeah, I think that bull maintenance and bull development is one of the most overlooked things on our operations. I'm a geneticist and I preach the value of investing in good genetics, and I think a lot of people do that, right? You invest in this bull, you invest in his genetic potential, but if the management of that bull doesn't prepare him to deliver that genetic potential, it's all for naught, right? So I think all these things, and it goes back to really forage and feed management at the end of the day, right? All these things are connected and they result in an animal being able to deliver genetic potential to your cow herd as effectively as possible.
Well, the interesting thing you bring up forage, because the other side of it is well, you can sit back and say, well, there's a lot of producers that I don't have another pasture, so my bull doesn't come out. And that's fine. You manage your animals how you want to manage your animals, but you got to think now you're probably not having that bull breed 30, 40, 50 cows in a 90-day period. He's breeding 30, 40, 50 cows in a 12-month period. And the rest of the time he's laying under a shade tree, which for that operation is fine, but it equates to the potential for good grass in the spring, get a little fleshy. That no rain in August, now we're going to drop him off. And so you can still get this fluctuation even out with the cow herd all the time that is really potentially problematic. And so you start thinking about, either that scenario or the scenario over the course of a 90-day breeding season. Are the calves he's producing in March and April when the grass is good,
Mhm.
or in the breeding season in the first cycle when he's fleshy, are they the same genetic, do they have the same genetic potential looking at it in terms of epigenetic? Because you're not going to change the DNA.
Sure.
No.
But
Yeah.
does the epigenetic potential of that animal change from first cycle to second in a breeding season, or
Sure.
from March to August in a consistent breeding season? And so it's really an interesting dynamic. And the funny thing about it is while you can't necessarily outrun genetics,
Mhm.
you can dang sure screw them up by how you manage it.
Absolutely.
And it definitely creates a conundrum that consistency then becomes the key. Consistency and moderation.
Yep. Yep. And I think that we always talk about these, you know, the heritable component of a trait, and something like weaning weight. It's how we get paid, but it's only 25 to 30% heritable, right? There's another 70% that comes from the environment. And that environment isn't just from the second that that calf's born until he's weaned, right? There's a whole bunch of stuff that happens in those 283 days of gestation. And even before that, Kyle's saying, that are going to impact the environment of that animal, that's going to show up in that phenotype that you deliver at the end of the year.
Yeah, we did some really interesting work during my master's study at Oklahoma State that we actually saw early gestational supplementation.
Mm-hmm.
So they were exposed twice. You had them in utero in the first 90 days. So really everything's just kind of developing and starting.
Mm-hmm.
But then those same calves were exposed during early lactation after they were born during that breeding season. So
Yep.
they were suckling. And what we found is that until things got really sparse, those calves could go find it elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
But the in utero stuff, obviously they don't find it elsewhere.
Yep.
There's no other way.
No.
And so you can overcome it with the thriftiness of an animal
Mm-hmm.
until the only source is that. And then it gets into some of the cool stuff you were talking about with the Netherlands data.
Sure.
That as we split these out, the impacts and the longevity of those impacts
Mm-hmm.
can really change. And that's why the bull side of it is fascinating, because we've always just kind of pawned it off as, well, we got the DNA.
Mm-hmm.
We know they got the growth potential. Now I just don't have to screw it up.
Mhm.
Well, yes and no, because
Mhm.
we might be changing the efficiency of them prior to even turning the bull out.
Right.
And that's some really cool stuff we got going on.
No, that's great. That's great. Troy already mentioned the overlooked side of it is, right? Let's talk a little bit to try to wrap up this conversation here about these areas that you think we could improve to the future. What are these repro, especially in the repro management that you have been working the last few years, that we think we are still, we have room to improve it in Tennessee?
So it's really just kind of combining all this. We've talked a little bit about the cow side, a little bit about the bull side. And so what we've been working on now is understanding when we put those together. Because realistically, on the repro side, if we're not producing calves, then we've got bigger issues.
Mm-hmm.
But if we know we can change the seminal plasma on the bull side with nutrition, and we know we can impact the uterine environment with nutrition, then when those get together, does a certain bull environment mesh well or worse with a certain female environment?
Mhm.
And so we actually just completed a study in Middle Tennessee looking at that compatibility. We had bulls restricted and bulls on maintenance that we collected seminal plasma and we seminated females, and then looked at the uterine response. So basically went through a 7-day period, and now we're looking into, okay, if the uterus responds to certain components differently, is that good, bad, or ugly?
Mm.
And so from there, now we can start getting into a compatibility thing that might allow us to maybe not mitigate certain aspects, because there's times that the environment's just not going to play fair, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if you've got certain components that mesh better or worse with other components, then we can start making management and decision strategies based off of those that really could change our reproductive efficiency. And fortunate and unfortunate, some of our smaller producers won't see a lot of that. But the other side is if you can change up 1 or 2 calves, it can really start to refocus some of where you're going and understanding that. And of course, with our larger producers, 1 or 2% makes a big difference.
Mm-hmm.
And so we don't have to revolutionize the wheel. Fortunately for us, the bull's still going to make the cow and the cow is still going to produce a calf.
Mm-hmm.
So if we can just fine tune that process for a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
we can get a lot of gains out of it.
Yeah.
That's great. Troy, any final comment?
Some people might not know that Kyle's actually quite a horseman.
Oh yeah.
Any tips for our horse producers that are listening today, Kyle, in the fetal programming or otherwise?
So the interesting thing on that, and we've actually, Dr. Ivy and I have been talking a little bit, can we extrapolate some of this into the horse world? Because, you know, we've been doing some work looking at the uterine environment compared to the vaginal environment, and the inflammatory response. There's some things in the cow that are similar. But realistically, they stay very separate. But in the horse, where because of the way all that works during estrus, there's a chance that it's a little more shared. And there's a chance that there's more seminal. No, I shouldn't say there's a chance. We know there's more seminal plasma from the stallion that makes it to the uterus of the mare because of the way mating works. And so we really like to hope to get to that someday, where we're working through these in cytokine markers and inflammation markers in multiple species that will help kind of increase it in general. And so it's how many sides of the dice can we get?
Yeah, I didn't know he'd have an actual horse application here. That's good stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. We are always learning this.
You
Oh,
thought
yeah.
I was just gonna tell them to sell off and save your money.
Yeah. No,
I wish I could tell you that happens, but not at my house.
Yeah,
We just keep acquiring.
very good.
Kyle, thank you so much for joining us for this Live.Stock podcast. It's always a pleasure to have you around here. It's to me, it's always a learning process to come here and share it with you all and share with the farmers that are listening to us on YouTube, or now we are on the Spotify as well. So thank you so much for finding time in your schedule to be here. Troy, again, it's always a pleasure to have you in our table here.
Oh yeah, always good to fill in for Katie when I can.
Good, happy to be here.
Thank you guys. Hope you guys like it, and you'll see you guys next month. Thank you.